So please welcome Dr. Diane Hennacy to the show. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
All the way from Oregon. Yeah, this world and where we're at right now, and finding you and listening to this telepathy tapes, and that's what drew me to you. And people knowing my podcast and the last 5 years of doing this, and always have been reaching out ever since they came out. Have you heard the telepathy tapes? Da, 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 da. It's a constant. It came from everywhere.
Yeah.
So they must have known that that was going to be an interest of mine. And I work with children, and I work with children here in San Diego at different schools, teaching them mindset. And once I started understanding more about the telepathy and the things that you've learned your entire, pretty much your whole life, going deeper into seeing these children, I look at the children now because of you. And I go to these classrooms and I see these little 4 and 5 year olds up to like 12 or 14. And I see this like when they're this young child and they're so fresh from God, there's no, it's like me trying to say, you're more powerful than you can even imagine. And it's just like, that's always what we talk about. Like you can do anything. Like don't be dumbed down by this world or by programming of all the things. But when you realize, these children that you've been studying and all the things that you've studied, it brings back to me like almost like a full circle of like, look where we're at now. And finally, people are really understanding. I feel like when the people keep saying the veil is thinning but it's like, oh my gosh, we're all magic. And we've been so made that we're not magic and we don't have these abilities. So I'm so grateful for you. I've learned so much. I love going down your rabbit hole and soaking up everything. And I know people come into my life at the exact time that the divine timing is what I call it. And that is you at this moment. And when I know that it's meant for me to hear, I know that the people that are listening to this and will listen to this are ready for this too. So if you could go back and explain what I love is kind of how you started. The thing that comes to my mind is when you in your teenage years and the friend that the child that went to the circus and you kind of started trying to figure out this magician and that kind of story, but then going into when you were in 1989 in Harvard where you had there was a mentally ill person, but she kind of gave you like, you're going to move to San Diego. You're going to have, will you kind of go in there just so people understand? Like, and I know your family's your dad is very scientific. I mean, you come from a very scientific background too, but can you kind of go from wherever that takes you in your mind?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my father was a really brilliant scientist, and he had graduate degrees in three different areas of science. He was a marine biologist and a geneticist and a physiologist who eventually became the head of the artificial heart program at Battelle. And my earliest memories were when we were at Hanford and he was doing research on plutonium. And it's his research that helped end the nuclear testing that was being done just out in the open in the West. Because he showed that it really would be harmful to the wildlife. And I was raised from the get-go to be a scientist. I mean, as a child, my brother and I played with science kits, built crystal radios and soldered in electronic components and circuit boards and played with gyroscopes and weather balloons and that sort of thing. And my father would also bring home animals from the laboratory, the animal laboratory, and I would make them pets and I would
Oh, wow.
study their behavior and
What kind of animals?
oh, he'd bring home a mouse or a guinea pig or a rabbit, those kinds
Huh.
of things. But then also we'd go into the woods and I'd get tadpoles and, watch them grow into being frogs. And I had a pet snake and,
Huh.
just all, chicken, just all kinds of animals that really fascinated me because I I could see that they were conscious beings. I mean, and I could see that they were sentient and that And I just wondered, what is it like to be them? And so I even studied animal behavior when I was an undergraduate. And but I fell in love with neuroscience and and was really raised with this, atheistic, materialistic, reductionistic view of the world. And the first time that I ran into something that was really highly unusual was when I was a teenager. And a friend of ours worked in the summer for a magician. And this was a magician who did Houdini tricks. And what Mark did was he was the one who had the hammer in case, well, Jay Michelle was in the water tank, all, tied up in a straitjacket with chains and whatnot. If he couldn't get out of that in time, Mark was there with the hammer to, break the glass and keep him from drowning. But of course, Mark never had to use the hammer. And one day, Jay Michelle was in town, and Mark said, "You've got to meet this guy." And instead of doing a Houdini trick, what he did is he said, "Go over to the other side of the room and pick out a book and just start reading it." And so I'm standing, I don't know, at least 15 feet away from him with a book in my hand. And he's reading for me word for word what I'm reading. And I put that down. I'm like, wow, how'd you do that? And he said, oh, grab another book. And I grab another book, open it up to a random page. And he did the same thing. And he said to me, when I asked him, "Well, how did you do that?" He said, "Oh, it's magic, and the magician never reveals his tricks." And so I didn't know what to make of that. I mean, I was familiar with the fact that there were magicians, of course, and that they could do things we couldn't understand. And I'm still thinking, in a scientific way, about everything. That obviously there must be a scientific explanation for all of this. And I mentioned it to my father, and he said, "Well, there is something called telepathy. That kind of sounds like telepathy." He said it's controversial, but there actually is some evidence for it. And there was a time period in the 70s when I was a teenager when it looked like these kinds of abilities were going to be accepted. And you had all of the different branches of military intelligence supporting research on psychic abilities, and there were a lot of top scientists who had said that they believed that these phenomena were real. And I mean, you had people like Albert Einstein and Carl Jung and Freud even all said, giving some credence to this. And those were big names.
Hmm.
And so anyway, so fast forward, I didn't really think that much about it, but fast forward, and I'm in my medical training as a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, and I'm being told that anybody who claims that they can do these things is automatically psychotic, that they're automatically out of touch with reality, and that they need to be put on medication until they tell you that, whatever it is that they're claiming, if it's that they say they see ghosts or they claim they can read people's minds or somebody can read their mind. If any of these kinds of predictions meant that the person had a mental illness and was imbalanced, and you had to put them on an antipsychotic. And antipsychotics back then, and still to this day, have side effects. But back then, I mean, they had a lot of serious side effects. And so anyway, so that's the way I was trained. And then fast forward to when I'm
Pick
at
up the next
Harvard.
breadcrumb.
Yeah, I pick up the next breadcrumb. I'm at Harvard, and I'm the basically the director of the consultation liaison service at Cambridge Hospital. And I was the uh, psychiatrist that would get called in to evaluate people on the medical and surgical and obstetric floors if the staff thought that they had a psychiatric problem that needed attending to. And sometimes it was that they thought that the illness that they were complaining of was all just psychological, and that really that all they needed was you know uh, follow up with a psychiatrist. Things like conversion disorder where you become paralyzed, and it really has deep psychological roots. And so I would assess these people, and oftentimes I would find that they actually really had a medical disorder, and I would give the medical staff some ideas about what tests to order and whatnot. And so that's one kind of consult, but another type of consult was that if somebody was a management problem because they were severely mentally ill. And one day they asked me to go assess this woman on the medical floor who had been admitted the night before for what was thought to have been a heart attack. She had chest pain and various other symptoms. And back then, it would take a couple of days to get the blood work back that would let you know whether or not somebody had had a heart attack. And this woman was wanting to leave the hospital against medical advice. And you can't leave against medical advice if the staff thinks that you're mentally incompetent to make that decision. And she was telling the staff that she saw ghosts and that she could predict the future and she knew everything was going to be fine. And so she didn't
Love it.
convince them of her sanity. And they called me in and thought that I would just basically rubber stamp their assessment and that they'd be able to keep her for another day or two until they had the test results. And I didn't want to just rubber stamp the paperwork. I wanted to go in and meet with her and see if I could gain her cooperation and just convince her to stay rather than doing something that seemed, kind of heavy-handed to me. I'm a big advocate for people's freedom and sovereignty. And so I went in to see her, and she told me, she was seeing ghosts, and I said, "Oh well, I'm sure if there's any place that has ghosts, I'd imagine it'd be a hospital." And, and then she said, and I also know that my tests are going to come back normal, so there's no reason to keep me. And I said, well, how do you know that? She said, oh, I'm psychic. And I said, well, I said, how do you know that? And she said, well, I've just gotten information about people, my whole life. I was born this way. I was born with a caul over my face, and this woman was half Native American and half African American. And she said, in my culture, we know that that's a sign of somebody who's going to be psychic. And I have this gift, but I don't make a living at it. And in fact, she actually worked as a janitor in another hospital system.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, well, I said, that's very, very interesting. And then she looks at me and she goes, I see an aura above you, and it's this white light, kind of like she said, it's like it's Christ-like. And she said, and I get a really good feeling about you, and I'm getting information about your future. Do you mind if I tell you? And I'm like, no, sure, go ahead and tell me. And then the first thing she says is, well, your husband's a chemist and he's applying for a job in two different cities. And my husband was an MD and a PhD biochemist who, yes, that very week he was applying for two postdoctoral positions in biochemistry. And so at that point, I'm like, that's very interesting. And then she says, and in his heart of hearts, he wants to go to one place, but you'll end up at the other one. And I knew at his heart of hearts, he wanted to go back to Johns Hopkins where we met. And he was, I think, 13th generation Baltimorean. And so,
Oh, wow.
and so I still had family there. I mean, he was even born in that hospital. So I thought, yeah, he probably, that is probably in his heart of hearts where he wanted to go. And, um, and I said, well, I said, well, which city are we going to end up in? And she said, well, name some cities, and then I'll tell you which one. So I named, about a dozen cities. And she goes, San Diego, you'll end up there. And she said, and you'll have a daughter, and you'll be very successful, and you'll eventually leave psychiatry to write books. And she just
Wow.
started saying all of these things. And the things that she said that were about my current situation were all accurate. And then as time moved forward, the things that she predicted all came true. And it made me think about, even if you only have one person that can do that, it's telling you that people, that some people have these capacities.
Right.
And then, and then I think back to this mentalist or this magician that I met when I was a teenager, and I'm like, he never did really explain that to me, and so I thought, well, I'm gonna look into this, and so I dug deeply, and I discovered that there are a lot of people that have studied this over the last, 100 plus years, And there's some people that have given it some legitimacy, and yet it's still not accepted. And and it really has profound implications for our understanding of who we are as human beings. It has profound implications for psychiatry and whether or not it's appropriate to uh, put a label on people who claim to have these experiences and abilities and then put them on medications. Um, so I considered it my duty to investigate these kinds of phenomena. And I also was aware of something called savant syndrome because of having met Oliver Sacks back in 1986, shortly after he had written his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and reading about these people that had conditions that were considered to be severe disabilities, such as these two twins who had been institutionalized because they really couldn't take care of themselves. And yet they could do calendar calculations for thousands of years, telling you what day of the week any particular date would fall on. Or they could instantaneously tell you how many matches, if you spilled a carton of matches, they could instantaneously tell you how many matches were on the floor.
Wow.
But even more striking was that they could generate prime numbers, which are numbers that are only divisible by one in themselves. They could generate prime numbers in the six digits and were validated by Oliver Sacks to be accurate even in the 12 digits. And they would just do them just one after another, consecutive prime numbers when there's no good algorithm for that.
Hmm.
And they even did it to 20 digits, but the computers back in the 60s couldn't calculate it to that at that point. And so they weren't validated, not because they were inaccurate, but because they were exceeding computation capacity. And yet, if asked, how'd you do that? It's that they weren't calculating it. They said that they just saw the information. And I thought that's very similar to how a lot of psychics report that they experience the information that they acquire, that it's somehow information that you don't think that they should, would know. And they say they just know it, or they see it, or they have a guide that tells it to them. But it's not an active analytical process. It's more of a perceptual process that they acquire the information from.
When you say that, what comes to me is time and future memory. Like so there's something that been learning lately, and that's why you come into my life at the exact time. But when you understand how these minds work, explained how you see time and what you've learned and how they're picking up on your future, like it's a future memory because everything's happening at once. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I talk about future memory in my book, The ESP Enigma.
Right.
And um, so the idea is that there are many physicists who have proposed including Einstein, who've proposed that our sense of time is an illusion, and that it's just how we experience time, but that doesn't mean that time is this dimension that moves as an arrow in one direction and only forward. And what Einstein said was that basically the past, present, and future all coexist.
Right.
It's this idea that it's a full dimension, just like we have the physical dimensions. That's for people who've studied math, the X, Y, Z axes. There's these three physical dimensions, but the idea is that time, itself is also a full dimension in which you could travel both forwards and backwards. Um, and so I knew about that. And I kind of think of it almost like that, that it that your life is already out there, almost like on a movie reel,
Right.
and we're just kind of experiencing it frame by frame. Because people do report this phenomenon called future memory, in which they they'll be in the moment and then they see these like visual changes. Um, and it might be like little flashing lights or, but it's like they see some kind of visual changes. And then the next thing they know, they are in some other setting with things that are happening around them. And then, and it can, just like a dream can be, seem like it unfolds over a period of an afternoon, but the dream itself is only a few minutes long. Similarly, these future memory episodes, the person's only experiencing it in this framework of time in a few minutes, but it's actually,
Right.
it's actually a much longer memory than that. And then what happens is they come back into, this setting and then this time point, this point in space time. And then in the future, all of a sudden they start to realize, oh my gosh, this is what I experienced before. And it's different from deja vu, which is a
Yeah,
very,
so I was going to ask you that.
yeah,
That's what,
that's a vague sense that you've already experienced this before. But with future memory, it's like, you really what's going to happen next. It really is like you're watching the movie a second time because it's that rich in details.
hmm. Wow. Yeah,
And,
that's
and one of the things we know about future memory is that there's certain things that predispose people to it because people have these spontaneous accounts of it. And one of them is Phyllis Atwater, PMH Atwater, who wrote a book about it. And for her, she attributed her abilities to having had several near-death experiences. When you after you've had a near-death experience and you've had, usually there's an out-of-body experience with it. It's like you've cracked you've cracked
right.
the shell of the egg, and now you can escape again. And the more you've done that, the easier it is to kind of escape, this sort of, uh, locked in, kind of narrow, you know, uh, 3D reality and
Right.
go into a more, where there's, where space, it's like the idea of space time as being localized doesn't exist. You're outside of space, what we think of as typical space time. And what that is, I mean, that's open for debate, whether or not it's that you go to another dimension or, what's going on there. But you're definitely outside of this three-dimensional um, reality.
Right. Let's go to, you wrote the book, the ESP Enigma, and a woman found you through the book and invited you to go to India. And I feel like this is when, am I correct? Or are you looking at me like I'm doing
No,
something?
you're absolutely 100%. I didn't know which woman you were going to refer to as finding me because, so yeah, yeah,
Well, she invited you to come to India.
absolutely.
So this is kind of the beginning of like when you started to see these children and experience their magic.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So it's what had happened is that I in my book, The ESP Enigma, I talk about autistic savants and how similar it is to psychic abilities and I started talking on various radio shows. We didn't really have podcasts, like we do today to this extent. And I started, talking on radio shows with people about how I wanted to study savants and how I really thought that they could be the sort of Rosetta Stone to understand consciousness, but also gaining they could really, help us to gain acceptance for psychic abilities being a real phenomena. And so, because as I said earlier, they're just so similar.
Right.
And so after doing that, this woman from India named Maithili Chari, she read my book, she loved it, and she said, basically that I was describing what are called siddhis, in Hinduism, and that's these basically these abilities like levitation or telepathy or precognition that people develop after sustained meditation and various other practices. And so it's very much part of the Hindu spiritual tradition. And she said that she was working with all of these autistic individuals who had savant skills, and they also had ESP skills. And she invited me over to India to evaluate them.
Yes. And so you met Haley.
No, that's not where I met Haley.
Oh, it's not.
No, no. When I was in India, that's where I met Vishal.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. That's,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And so Vishal, whose name in Sanskrit means limitless,
Oh, I love it.
yeah, he was only 5 years old, and he'd written a book about, what it was like to be him. And he's written two books, and he describes how, his brain is just, on overdrive. And his mother had noted that he knew a lot about math and science without having been exposed to it. And so they asked me to go over and start testing him for his knowledge of math and science, and which I did, and I saw that he knew a lot of things that, unusual for a 5-year-old boy to know. And I evaluated some other autistic savants over there for their skills. I mean, one was a girl who could put together 1,000-piece puzzle where all puzzle pieces were solid silver. Okay, so that you don't have any of those, cues that
Right.
typically have for doing a jigsaw puzzle, and each piece was unique, such that it wasn't like, oh, there's a lot of different ways that you could piece this together and it would all be done. No, it was, she was actually able to assess what each piece and put it where it belonged. And she could do it in a week.
Wow.
And
That's
and
great.
most of us would never be able to do it.
No, ever. Years.
Yes. Yes. And shortly before I was getting ready to leave India, I was talking with Maithili, and she said, "Oh, by the way," she said, "all of these kids are telepathic, and they're telepathic with one another." And I was like, "Oh, I wish I knew that while I was here, because I was there for a couple of weeks." I said, but I wanted to come back, to test that out. And shortly after I came back from India, that's when I had a father contact me about his daughter Haley,
Okay.
and they lived in the United States, and um, and her story was just really remarkable, that she had two therapists who were coming into the home on a regular basis to do homework with her. And the family thought that Haley was a mathematical savant because she could solve very complex mathematical uh, equations in rapid, almost instantaneous manner. And they just kept giving her more and more complicated equations. See, well, what's her limit? And it's like, oh, she doesn't seem to have a limit here. And then one day, the therapist who was doing that with her's calculator died on her, and so she switched to using her iPad, and the iPad gave her the answer in a different type of notation. So it was the same. It's kind of like the difference between what, it's a logarithmic notation. And when a lot of people don't know what logarithmic is, but just think of it this way, that like when we think about the scale for measuring earthquakes, okay, the difference between a like a five, a 5 and a 6 earthquake is um, it's substantially greater than the difference between a 4 and a 5 earthquake.
Okay.
So, so because it's not a linear,
Right.
one scale. It's like this. And so So you're going to have a very different kind of readout if you're giving it in a, if you're giving the answer to a mathematical question that didn't ask you to give the answer, then convert it to logarithmic. It's going to be a totally different number. And so the therapist looks over there at the answer and she sees it's in logarithmic notation, and then she sees that Haley gives it in logarithmic notation, and yet the iPad is totally out of Haley's sight, and she's like, wait a minute, what? She's like, how'd you know that? And Haley said, well, I see the numerators and denominators in your head, and she's like, really? And then started asking her these other questions, and Haley knew the answer to them, and she's like, oh my God, you really are reading my mind. And then
Wow.
this second therapist discovered it independently. She's there seeing that Haley is answering things with the same kind of spelling, mistakes that she would use. She's like, what's going on here? And then she asked Haley to write how you say I love you in German, and Haley did. And she's like, oh my God, you really are reading my mind. She said, yeah. And so anyway, so this was all about 13 years ago.
Wow. You
And
know, the when we look at life when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s and what we didn't talk of autism or there was nothing and I know that it was like 1 in 10,000 and now it's 1 in 30 and it depends on boy or girl. Can you explain that and why you explain the explanation of why it went from that and non-existent to now we're in the 2025 and I think of, the girls are 16 and 19 mine and so I've, been in the school system for the last pretty much my last 2 decades and experiencing, them seeing the children being taken out. And, we never had that. If anything, it was if people were extra smart, they would go to, the next level of teaching. It was never that experience. So, what is your explanation on this timeline that we're on?
well, so first of all, that one of the things that people need to understand is that the development of the brain is an incredibly complex um, phenomenon. Okay, it is. I mean, just think about what the brain, is involved in, and you realize that it's a much more complicated organ than anything else, much more complicated than the heart or the gut or the liver, and any of the other organs. And it is very, very sensitive to all kinds of things. It's very, very sensitive to while under development, it's very sensitive to different waveforms, whether or not it's a sound waveform or a light waveform, those things can influence brain development.
Right,
Similarly, chemicals can influence brain development. And so much of it, and different frequencies can affect the timing of cells. So you have all of these exposures that we're getting while the baby is in utero, because the reality is that the waves can still, that they don't transmit the same, but they still can enter in our bodies.
right,
And so the point, and the brain continues to undergo massive development during, well, I mean, our whole life, the brain is plastic and it's changing, but the brain is still developing during the first 18 years, and it is especially still developing during the first 7 years.
right.
And we've introduced all of these artificial things into our environment very quickly during the past 50 years. And they haven't really been tested to see what effect they have on brain development. And yet, yeah, and we know the brain development is changing. We, I mean, we can see it because it's not just autism that's increased. in incidence. It's ADHD has increased, and we're seeing more anxiety and depression in kids, and it's not just circumstantial. There are certain things that can make someone feel depressed that are there's certain frequencies that can make people more depressed, or or toxicities that can make you more depressed. And our diet has changed dramatically.
Mm,
And we know that the gut microbiome plays a huge role in creating the neurotransmitters that the brain, you know, operates on. And so the point is that we have to think in a whole, systemic way about, the causes of autism. And I think one of the problems is that we're lumping together a lot of individuals and labeling them autistic that are really, really different from one another.
right.
And then on top of that, a lot of studies are just looking for one single thing, oh, it's this, or it's,
Right.
aluminum, or it's the
Vaccines.
vaccines, or it's the glyphosate, or it's the this or the that. And it's like the problem is that that's not it's not appropriate. You're not going to get any satisfying answers. And because it's really probably all of the above, depending upon the individual. It's probably a multifactorial thing where it's just you know th- you know something like the vaccine just is the straw on the camel's back. But it was like you're just waiting for to throw the match on on the gasoline infused material. It's just, and we need to look at the whole picture.
Right. Yeah, that helps. I think people, that's, you hear everything like vaccines. It's just like everyone's pouring into that these days, but I love to hear that because it helps people understand. Even the moms that I know that have children that have autism beat themselves up because why did I do that? I should have not done the vaccines, or I should have spaced them out. And I'm like, I don't know, is it maybe our soul contract? I don't know. I'm trying, you just don't know.
Well, yeah, and I mean, using the analogy that I did, I mean, where, the camel, the straw on the camel's back is that, um, there's something already different, and I think it's like for a lot of these kids, it's that their detoxification pathways are compromised, and that could be from, a lot of different reasons. But so they're more fragile,
Right.
as a result of that. And so then, if it wasn't the vaccine, the reality is it could have been something else that was the trigger. In
Right.
fact, it might have been the disease that the vaccine is trying to prevent.
Right.
And we don't know. I mean, and I'm not trying to tell anybody what to believe other than to realize that um, the way that it's all being addressed is, to me, it's not systemic and methodical enough and comprehensive enough. And there's way too many vested interests in it being one way or the other. And
Right.
it really needs to be done in an objective way where we're
Right.
where we're really trying to look at the answers, because the reality is that I think that the autistic individuals are the canaries in the coal mine.
Yes.
Um, and and um, and yeah, I do, along the way, I have become more and more spiritual. And
I've noticed that even in your, when I've been listening to you from even like 5 years ago, 10 year, and I'm watching the progression of you because I thought, can I ask her certain, like, you're talking about the avatar and our soul. And I said, oh, I can ask her more spiritual questions.
yeah, yeah, no, it's for me, this has definitely been a spiritual journey. And for me to have gone from being a strict materialist reductionist neuroscientist where I am today has been a fascinating journey. And it's not because I've done psychedelics. I've been afraid to do psychedelics.
Right. Me too.
So it's not because of that, and it's not because I have a mental illness. It's because it's been a combination of what seems to have been put in my path
Yes, for sure.
that stimulated my curiosity, and then having the kind of open mind and also the kind of analytical and intuitive mind that can really look at these things and try to you know try to I can zoom out and I can zoom in. I can get into the granular details, but I can also zoom out and see how it fits, with the greater body of science. And
Right,
that's one of the reasons why a lot of if they take the time to look at my work, a lot of scientists appreciate what they do, what I'm doing, because they see that I'm not out here trying to, do something woo-woo or
right.
I'm
Well, that's what I think is neat is that you attract both. So people that you will attract the scientists, but you do bring in I mean, the telepathy tapes brought in all the spiritual people thinking, finally, this is where we're going. They see the magic in these children and they're way beyond what people have dumbed them down to be.
right. Yeah. And I see that's really how I define my greater mission, is really to bring back science and spirituality together. They weren't separated if you go back.
Right,
Over 500 years ago. They weren't separated. And I think that there's, I mean, there's things that we've learned from science, having, gone through the scientific revolution, and, and learning how to look at things objectively. How do we take the subjective out? It's time to bring the subjective back in.
right,
It's because we've been in this objective way where, we study life by killing the thing we're studying, or whatever.
right, exactly.
I mean, it's brought us to, a lot of things that, you look at it and go, well, okay, if we really want to answer these other questions, we need to come back in, bring back in the subjective, and we need to not exclude things just because we don't have an explanation for them.
Right. Okay, I want to talk about the blue light beings. Oh my gosh, that was like, I grasped onto that. And I'm like, we need to talk about this because everyone listening was going to go, what? Because when I think of that, because of how I just love children so much, it's been in every past life. I've always been connected to children. And my mom, being a mother to me is like the everything. That's my number one, always first priority and always has been. But when you talk about them seeing the blue light beings, oh, please describe that to us, Diane.
Well, first of all, let me back up a little bit just to understand why someone like me would even be talking about.
Right? Well, that's what made me think, oh gosh, we got to talk about this now. Bring her into spirituality.
Yeah, yeah. So let's back up a little bit. So I've been interested in ancient wisdom traditions. I was introduced to Buddhism and Hinduism, I mean, 40 years ago. And I was interested in it for similar reasons to why a lot of other scientists who have an interest in consciousness are interested in it. And it's because you have these Indian and Tibetan mystics who describe a reality that's very similar to the reality that, 100 years ago, physicists like, Einstein and Niels Bohr and, people like this were describing, where they realized that how we perceive reality is really an illusion, and it's led us to a place with physics where we, um, a lot of people say that, we live in far more dimensions than the dimensions that we're aware of, and that could be, as many as 10 or 11, in string theory, for example. And so, so we have that, and so I was studying, Eastern religions, and discovering that there's a lot of actually, a lot of it's based on observation. That a lot of the things that we think of as being, oh, primitive thinking or mythology, it's people aren't really understanding what it is. And so what you have within Hinduism is a lot of stories that help people to understand relationships. It's like you're not meant to take them literally.
Mm.
They're metaphorical.
Yes, I love that.
And um, and so similarly, um, I had a dream like 30 years ago that I was initiated as a shaman in a Native American tribe, and it came true actually several years ago.
Huh.
And I've been studying the Native American spirituality for a long time, and one of the things that I was aware of is this. And particularly the Hopis, because my great uncle was an honorary member of the Hopis,
Hmm.
and I went to Hopi Nation and met with people there, and they have a prophecy that is the Blue Star Kachina prophecy about when the Blue Star Kachina arrives, that is the sign of the end of the world the way that we know it and ushering in of a new world.
Huh.
I don't think of that as being apocalyptic. I see it as being uh, that reality is not going to be the same anymore. It's kind of like how some people say that telepathy tapes has changed them.
Right.
It's just that they just say, I can't look at an autistic
Yeah.
individual the same way anymore. And so it's a fundamental shift. And I think that what's happening right now is that there's a fundamental shift in consciousness that's occurring on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And more people are having what they call Kundalini awakenings, um, and other experiences. There are people that have that had these near death experiences and come back, and they're more vocal about what they experienced during that near death experience, because with the era of podcasts, a lot of people are finding out it's not just me. I'm not.
Right.
There's a lot of other people out there having these experiences. And so what happened is that I get emails from around the world from people who have these autistic children that have these abilities. I also get emails from around the world from people who have other who have sudden onset of psychic abilities, and they see me as someone that might be able to help them to understand what happened. And a number of these people had written to me saying that they see these blue light beings.
Hmm.
And when I started hearing that, the autistic kids saying that they see these blue light beings, and then I discovered that the elders of the Chumash over 100 years ago in the archives, it talks about um, blue beings, blue light orbs
Okay.
that are basically Marie Solaris said that they're our soul. That like when people die, then their soul is like carried in this like blue light orb, and this is way before you had any influence from the media today.
Right.
It's
Huh.
written in a book, and that was, um, gosh, December's Child talks about it in that book as well. Just has a brief allusion to it. And then there's an anthropologist who did research called Space Age Indians, in which she interviewed all of these Native Americans who saw blue light beings. That's one form of sort of contact experiences that she reports, and but there's, I mean, several stories in there of that, and
Hmm.
of them basically being all of the people who I just mentioned who report having had these experiences with blue light beings, all of them report the blue light beings as being angelic in nature, that they sense of love, and times they get healed from, or saved, rescued instead of dying. So that's how they all describe them. Um, do I have scientific proof they exist? No. I'd love for someone to tell me how I could design an experiment to do that.
Right.
Um, but I do think that it's interesting that all of these independent sources are saying this. And then I just think it's very, very interesting that it fits in with the Hopi prophecy.
But explain how the children, they can connect to the children that aren't wanting to come down right now. Explain that story.
Oh, well, I mean, so I've been told by people who, uh, you know, have easy access to the other side of the veil, for lack of, other words, that there are these children, these souls, that are afraid to be born.
Yeah.
Because when you're on the other side of the veil, you have access to everything, and they're seeing what's going on here, and that they're afraid to come, and um, so these blue light beings are reportedly kind of they're frequent companions, okay, to when they do come in, a lot of these autistic children say that they have protection from these blue light beings.
Do you feel like the children, I mean, now I've interviewed many people and read things about, our DNA and how, it's one or two strands, we have 12, and the ones that are coming in now, the children, they have way more strands of DNA um, activated.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I've heard some things about that, but I don't have genetic testing on the children,
Uh,
and I haven't. Um, I mean, I'm working on getting IRBs. In order to do research and to publish it, you have to do it through an independent review process. And so, it's called an IRB. And so I'm working on getting IRBs so I can do multiple different studies. But no, I haven't looked at that. But I've heard people make those kind of theories.
Well, I just see, yeah, I see the kids that I'm with, and even the most their imagination and when they draw things. I mean, they talk about the aliens, and I was telling the teacher, I said, I know you had an experience where someone drew, it looked like an alien and a gray. So it sparked my mind when I'm working with these children. They talk about different dimension. I mean, the words that come out of their mouth at 4 and 5 years old, and I tell the teachers, like, gosh, that's so fascinating that they talk about these aliens or the different dimensions. And they said, oh, that's from video games. And I was like, okay. But it's like I just see them like they are so fresh from that space, and they know so much. And this whole like um new wave of children coming in who really rose their, I mean, obviously they came down regardless of not wanting to. They knew that they had a place here to do something. And the autistic children too, to wake people up. I mean, I just look at them, like you said, after the telepathy tapes and going, learning from you, you just look at these children as like, oh my gosh, they know more than anyone does. There's so much more there. And it's just so, to me, it's just so, I don't want to say it like refreshing or like, it makes me excited when I see the world turning into this way, and where they start, it's like uncovering, opening the onion, right? Like every layer of this human being that we've been told is like being peeled now more rapidly than ever before. And to watch and see the work you do, and to see these children and understanding what they're teaching us, what they teach, what they've taught you in your research. Like, isn't it amazing to me that they signed up for that? I look at it that way. Like, they signed up to be have those gifts. They picked those parents who would actually do something and bring it to your attention to study to show the world that these kids are so beyond they're really what we all are. But we've had our all of our when we were all telepathy or telepathic. I look at the telekinesis and all the things that people say are just this. Only a few people have that. Don't you feel like we're all going to be doing telepathy in this on this planet at some time?
Well, it's. I think that we all come in the world having that ability.
Right.
Get shut down, and and I think that a lot of people have the ability, they don't even realize they have it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing more and more people who go, oh my gosh, I can do this too. And what they needed was is they needed a belief that it's possible. And they needed, also just a sense that it's okay and it's okay to do.
Right. Right.
So so that's definitely going on. But I'm careful of using the word all just because that means everyone. And there are some people that are just going to be the last of the the
The
last
last.
to adopt this, and it may be that they die before they ever adopt it.
Right.
It- you know,
Yes, for sure.
people that their belief system is so rigid.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that if by all you mean like, all of the children, okay, yeah, the younger generations coming in, okay,
Mm-hmm.
then yes. I mean, I think that I'm more optimistic now than I have been in my entire life that the paradigm is changing and while I'm still here, that we'll see it change within mainstream science. I'm really optimistic about that now, and so it has huge uh, implications for our educational system. And I think we need that more than ever now. I
Oh,
mean,
I do too. As a mother, watching your children do their homework, especially, or go to college and study things why is she even taking that class?
exactly. I mean, and the kids know it. I mean,
Oh,
they know their time's being wasted.
yes, I hear that all the time from my oldest at college. Second year, Mom, I'm taking these classes that is such a waste of time. I can't stand it.
Yeah, they're being bored. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and and then you have AI, the advent of AI, which it's like you know that some of the things they're being asked to do in school are AI can already do it better or will be doing it better.
Right.
And how demoral faster, how demoralizing is that? And so so what we have to do as a species is we have to make AI just a tool, and we need to recognize what we as humans are really fully capable of, because there are things that we're capable of, AI will never be able to.
Right.
And that's one of the things that's really pushing me to get this work out there and spread the word, because I really want people to understand that and we need to envision um, we need to envision kind of new fields for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
new careers, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
That use these abilities. So rather than living in a world in which it's like, oh no, that's impossible, and sit here and memorize all of this nonsense that you'll never ever use in your entire life.
I know.
Meanwhile, not teach you any practical skills and have you siloed from other people, so you're not even learning the skills of personal interaction with others,
Mm-hmm.
social skills and all of that. I mean, the things they need to be learning are those things.
Right.
and developing our intuition and et cetera, and thinking about what, what it is that turns us on, where's our bliss, what puts us in that really positive space that we feel passionate about life and what we can do for others and the planet. And let's just move into that. And that's where I'm at.
Yes. Oh, I am there too with you, Diane. Oh my goodness. The conversations I have with my girls and Paige, even today, when you're talking about the AI, she says, Mom, the teacher tells us to read these articles. Doesn't she know everyone's going to copy and paste them, put them into Chat GPT, and it's going to tell them what it was about. No one's going to read it. They need to change the way they teach people. They teach us. It's just it's all from like way old ages, and so it's just we're at that precipice, like and I'm experiencing it because of that with my girls because we're right there. And I see it and I think I get frustrated. And then when I'm with the children at the school and these schools are like special schools, they're not public schools. So of course the parents are more aware or they wouldn't have put their children here. So of course they're open to everything I say and they are hungry for it. They want their children to learn what I teach. So I just need it to go to the public school. I need to spread it. It's like my passion is just having all these parents understand, we're in a new world. We need to tell the children that they keep, that 0 to 7 is the most important years of their life, that if what you're doing.
The 0 to 7 is really, really that is such a critical time period. Yeah, I was just reading something about perfect pitch, which was really interesting, and it was saying that it's both a combination of genetics and having early musical training.
Mm,
And you have to have had the musical training before the age of 6.
yes.
And so and 6 is about the age when maybe some kids are starting to have musical training.
Hmm.
And so, it's one of the reasons why perfect pitch is so rare. But so so there's a lot of these things that we should be having children do during those first, raising them with multiple languages,
Hmm.
um, the arts are so critical,
Mm,
development of the right hemisphere and that Gestalt thinking and et cetera.
right.
And so there's so many things that we could do that actually are fun
Right. Imagine that. Fun.
and develop the brain. So that the brain is actually going to be more, the kind of brain that we need, and in terms of being able to solve complex problems and to and to really, heal each other and the planet.
Right. Oh, Diane, thank you, thank you, thank you. I loved every minute. It went so fast. There's so many more things. I could do a part 2 and a part 3 easy, but I just appreciate your time. Can you tell people where to find you, how to get your book, and all the magical things that you do or are doing or have in what you're planning on doing?
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, so people can find me. My website is Dr. D-R-I and then Diane, D-I-A-N-E, Hennessy, Hennacy.com. And I just in the process of founding a nonprofit research institute for studying um, neurodivergence. And, and I'm really excited about that. I've been working on some, grants for research proposals and the kinds of things that I'm wanting to study is I'm not just wanting to study the skills that these autistics have, whether it's doing mediumship readings or predicting the future or telepathy, or healing, some of them claim, but also understanding, and understanding, what is different about them that they have those abilities, um, and how can we help them to be operating at optimal function? Yeah, what is it that they need? And then, and then also a lot of that's going to translate into things that we could just do for people that are not in the autistic population, once we
Right.
understand all that. Um, and so, and then it's also the Hennessy Institute's mission is also educating people. Yeah, so it's gonna, and eventually I want to be doing spiritual retreats with people, helping to empower individuals so that they can just um, have a sense of purpose. But it's got to be, not me telling them what, or not someone else telling them, why they're here and what they should be doing, but just them being able to really do what they need to do to get that kind of clarity
Hmm.
and, sort of, push aside all of the conditioning and expectations and whatnot that kind of causes us to limit ourselves. So I'm interested in all of that. And we're working on the website, and we'll have a
Oh,
website.
good. Oh, thank you. I love everything that you do. And it resonates with me when you said the retreats, because I do retreats too. But I started, when you said that, it's something sparked in me. I said, oh, I need to start doing children retreats or something with parents retreat. Like it opened something in me. So thank you for the little spark.
Okay, you're very welcome. Well, thank you.
Oh,
A pleasure.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.